few studies done to try to seed the plant and see if they could get it established from seed. But seed was in such short supply that they only planted 100 seeds for each experiment. So with no water or anything to protect them, that's a really small number of seeds to be planting. But during her studies, Joyce had 2 plants in one location that established from seed and were there even 5 and 10 years later. And so when she came out, they weren't marked, but she walked straight over to where they were. And it was an interesting thing to me. She said, "I think these are my babies." And I said, "Great." And I think it's really true because whenever we survey the place, these 2 plants have just always been in an area where there aren't any other plants. And so it's always made me wonder, how did these plants get there? So I think that was a really good story, because that means that in 1988 and 89 she planted them. Then they're about 20 years old now. They are spreading in the cracks, and there are more than 2 plants, but 2 big ones are there. And so it does show that you can plant seeds of the species and that they can reproduce and grow. So that was really good news, because we're embarking on doing a lot of that this year. Each year we've collected seed. We also do discovery surveys and look for more. And the picture here on the right of Barney, once again looking like he's suspended over the air, is when we found the population of plants down below one of the locations. So he just looked right over, he's comfortable with climbing, and there was a nice ledge down there. And lo and behold, that's how finding more of the species begin to take place at the canyon. These are the pictures of the 2 areas in the 2009 survey where we found several thousand plants down below. And so that was pretty exciting too. So the habitat down below looks a whole lot like the habitat up above. It's just a little harder to get to. This year we also had a wonderful moment. People have been studying this plant since 1988, and even in 1973 they noticed it was having problems. So it's been 37 years since people started thinking this plant's in trouble, and 22 years since it was pretty much listed, and not a single plant had ever been put in the ground. So this year we had grown some plants to see if we could figure out how to grow them, and we decided to take a bold stab. So we put 5 plants into the ground last July at the height of monsoon season to just see, can we do this? Can we get them to live? Because we're supposed to be doing a big planting this year, and if we couldn't do a small planting, it would probably be a big waste of time and money to be doing a large planting. So this is the first of the plants going into the ground. You can see they're pretty small. They're in tubes that are about 2.5 inches deep, and that's because that's about all the soil depth you have to plant them in. They don't occur in any deeper soil, and when you're out at the site, if you have the deeper soil, you get the common plant that looks similar. You don't get the sentry milk-vetch. So we planted 5 of them in. We took really very perfect steps to plant them as nicely as we could, and gave them a lot of tender love there and good feelings. Watered them in and kept watering them as was needed. You can see they're all clustered around one big limestone platform at Maricopa Point, but in what's probably a traditional habitat for them, but no plants are growing around there right now. And pretty much we would water them every couple of days if they needed it. If there were monsoons or later on snow, we didn't have to water them. And we were really happy because we had, so far we still have 100% success on those. So this is what it looks like in winter. So once you get into winter there, the plants are pretty much taken care of for the duration. You don't have to worry about them being eaten or much stepped on or drying out or any of those things. So winter is the good time for the plant to just take in the snow and be protected. One of the things we did as part of the recovery plan actions was to do a little bit more ecological studying of the plants, because as I say, they've been studied for a long time, but there were just huge gaps in what's been known. Having Emily there as an intern meant that she was full-time on this plant, so she could do things like observations that you couldn't do if you were driving up, and just hitting and missing it. So this is kind of interesting. This is a spring melt. So the snow has gone away, but only temporarily. You can see the low mats of the plant growing in the rock, And you can kind of see parts of it are really gray and they're not coming back to life yet. A little bit above that, it's looking kind of mushy. And then what will happen is the tips will start to grow and come out of their dormancy. And so it's really amazing that this dry-loving plant, you can find it sitting in pools of icy water, and it looks like mush and you just think this plant is dead. But mostly they are able to come back from standing water. The other thing Emily did was to observe seedlings and to see, are we getting seed germination? Because by the time we do the monitoring in May or June, things are drying out, and if there was germination in spring, we would miss it. She found almost no spring germination, but what she found was that with the monsoons, we got a whole lot of seed germination, and all of the circles are individual sentry milk-vetch seedlings. And so you see here they're falling in their own mat and germinating, which probably is not too good for their survival because they might dry out, but it does look like it's really important that they have some organic matter or something that holds moisture for them to germinate in. And then on the right, you can kind of see a pattern where you've got big mature plants and then the seedlings are spreading out from them. So we did have really good seed germination, and that was something to think about. They are teeny. You have to have really, really good eyes to work with them. And so you can see Emily was marking them with small pebbles that she would paint green. And so just above that pebble, you see an individual sentry milk-vetch seedling. And that one has, it looks like 2 seed leaves and 2 true leaves on it. And they can keep that size for a long time. But pretty much she found that for us, they germinated with the monsoons and that most of them made it until the snows came. Another thing we did was to look for a soil seed bank. There had been speculation in reports, but no studies, that there was not a soil seed bank. And so most plants, many plants, will drop their seeds and they can remain in the soil a long, long time. So even if you have 500 plants on the surface living, you might have 1 million seeds in your soil. So your population would not be as small as you think it is. So we wanted to look for seeds. We had to be really careful because we didn't want to disturb the habitat a whole lot because there is so little soil out around the plants. But we took, I think, 12 different soil samples and we looked kind of in some different areas of different distances from the parent plant. And we found out that yes, there is a soil seed bank, both in the south rim plants and in the north rim plants. And we're going to be germinating those this spring. We're trying to germinate them very soon, maybe next week, to see if they're actually viable. But that's another good thing because when your genetics are limited in your population and you might be weakened because of it, if your seed goes back a long time, then you've got a lot more genetic variation in your population than you think you do. And so that was a really exciting discovery. The other thing that somewhat confused me is that we found black seeds among the south rim plants and yellow seeds among the north rim plants in the seed bank, which is something that we've observed also when we collect seeds. And so that was interesting because it's the one characteristic that without doing genetic testing you are supposed to be able to use to tell the plants apart. So I'm kind of interested in talking to some geneticists and seeing what they think about that. So the other thing we wanted to do is find out who pollinates the plants. And once again, there had been reports and people said, well, I saw a bee on the plant, but I lost it. Or, yeah, there were some flies around, but I lost them. Or, who knows, maybe there were some ants. But nobody had ever really taken the time to do a pollination study or even to collect the pollinators that they saw and just have them identified. So we did a little observational study on the pollinators. And it was really quite an experience. The first thing we found out is that if you look at the pictures, we're wearing a lot of clothing. It is painfully unpleasant out there during the time of year when this plant blooms. It's a March, April bloomer and a little bit into May. And so when it's blooming, you're going out there and the sun may or may not come out because we had snow, we had hail, we had icy rain, which turned into rivers around us on the rocks. And of course, when it got that bad, we'd give up and come in. And out of 13 days of trying to do pollination studies, we had 3 days where it was actually decent enough weather to have pollinators present. So that was kind of interesting. Those pollinators have to work hard to get to this plant. So on a warm sunny day, one of the few, we did insect visitation rates, and we found out that there are 2 dominant species of insects. They're called Osmia mason bees, they're native bees. And there's also hoverflies. The hoverflies tend to come and pollinate the plant on colder, overcast days. The mason bees tend to be the ones who come out when the weather's good. The other thing we did is looked at times of visitation, and it was mostly between 10 and noon, and then again at 1 to 4. And this year I looked at that and I said, well, I think we better take our lunchtime at a different time, because probably they're there from 12 to 1 too. So we changed it a little bit this year, but they're definitely, they have their lunch at lunchtime is basically the message on the pollinators. It also means we don't have to go out there for sunrise and sit there and wait and wait and wait, because pretty much they're not out there until it warms up. So this is one of the main pollinators. This is Osmia riboflorus, the mason bee. And these guys were a lot of fun. You can hear them coming, so not much is going on, and you're getting really bored out there waiting for pollinators. But you hear these guys come, it's just like a Disney movie where the insects blast into town. I really, after doing this pollination study, I really appreciate Disney, because they must do incredible research to do those insect cartoons, because these guys acted just like Disney bees. They buzzed in, they were in groups of 3, they would get all raucous, they'd like knock each other over a little bit like teenagers fighting, and then they would visit a whole lot of flowers on the plants. And then the other pollinator, very cleverly called Osmia riboflorus, instead of Osmia riboflorus, which is giving me an appreciation for people who have trouble with plant scientific names, because I think I have trouble with insect scientific names. But he looked very similar, similar behavior. Once again, coming in 3s, doing the whole raucous act. But this guy is very, very metallic green. People describe him in the literature as blue, but we perceived him as green, and he looks green. And so between these 2 groups of pollinators, that was most of the pollination going on. And they would do, 60, 70, 80 flowers at a time. They were very busy pollinating. On the days that were shady and cloudy, cold and windy, we get this little hoverfly, and he's really very easy to identify. He's got those yellow markings on his body. He's got the wings that spread out to the side in kind of a V instead of crossing on his back. And so he was pretty much the pollinator on the windy days, but he didn't visit as many flowers. It looks like he was probably visiting, about, nine flowers a day is how many he was visiting. So he was doing some pollinating, but obviously he was not as active as the other guys. So then the next thing when we were at the North Rim is we didn't do a study there per se, but we observed, and lo and behold, we saw the same Osmia riboflorus, the black guy, working the flowers there. So it seems like they share a common pollinator to the 2 different species. So the next thing we're doing with the plant is we have an ex situ population. So ex situ just means away from the site. So it's away from the wild site. And it has several purposes. One purpose is that we need more seeds to do our reintroduction studies. And so we're growing plants in there, we're pollinating them, and we're producing seed. We can use the 1st generation seed from the greenhouse pollination for outplanting. We're not going to use, you don't use progeny from your crosses in the greenhouse. We also are using it to grow plants so that we can do our outplanting this fall. One of the first things we did, and I'm so excited because my old friend Chuck McDougall is here, who taught me to love and honor all things solar, is we got a very nice solar greenhouse kit at the park. And I was excited by that because we have a greenhouse that doesn't have to have propane or any of that stuff to keep it warm. And Grand Canyon Association actually helped us take care of the grant and get the grant that helped build this greenhouse. So we got a dedicated greenhouse in our nursery.